Good afternoon again from the Asia Europe Foundation in Singapore. My name is Miguel Pangalaman from the ASEF Education Department. I warmly welcome you to the fourth session of the 8th ASEF Regional Conference on Higher Education, where we will focus on Chapter 2 of the ARC8 Outlook Report 2030. This chapter tackles inclusive learning and teaching in a digital world. I am pleased to introduce our moderator, Mr. Alexander KNOTH, head of the Digitalization section of the German Academic Exchange Service, also known as DAAD. Before I hand over the floor to Mr. KNOTH, allow me to share with you some details on the session flow. This first part of the session is public. During the 5-minute health break at the end, the public audience is invited to move to the next session. For the ASEM policymakers who would like to continue with our moderator and experts in an in-depth policy dialogue, you can do so in the closed-door session. I hope you enjoyed the discussion on this chapter, and I will see you again after the public session. Mr. Knut, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Miguel, and also a warm good morning, good day, good afternoon, and good evening here from Berlin. And to everyone here in the audience of our session 2, Inclusive Learning and Teaching in a Digital World. As Miguel already said, I'm the Chief Digital Officer at the DAAD, also known as DAAD, and I'm working at the crossroads of internationalization and digitalization because for DAAD, it's also important that digitalization becomes a part of our DNA. We will start with our presentation from our two experts, and later on we will have the opportunity to dive a little bit more deeper into the raised topics and recommendations. If you want to join our conversation, please use the chat, post your questions and comments there so that we can put them into our discussion. The overall objectives of this event are as follows. We are officially launching the ARC Outlook Report 2030, Inclusive and Diverse Higher Education in Asia and Europe. As you already know, we want to start networking among participants to find new partners in creating a more equitable, inclusive, and quality in higher education by 2030. That's why we are glad to see that we have such a diverse mix of policymakers, university leaders, and academics, as well as representatives from international organizations and students with us today. Good to have you all here. So the report has been created by a group of international experts. Our presenters will talk about that in a minute. Therefore, I would like to welcome our speakers, Dr. Mislav BALKOVIC and Dr. Keiko. They were both heavily involved in creating the report. Dr. Keiko is a professor in the Division of International Affairs and KU COIL coordinator at Kansai University, and that's where we both know each other because we were both heavily involved in COIL activities, and yeah, good to see you here and to have a discussion with you. She's also the Vice Director of the Institute for Innovative Global Education at Kansai University. Her interest in internationalization also shows in future projects she is involved in. She holds the role of the Principal Project Manager for Inter-University Exchange Project funded by the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology, also known as the COIL Plus program to develop global career mindset. And she is engaged in the Success Osaka project that promotes the employability of international students who have studied in Japan. Dr. Mislav BALKOVIC, he is Assistant Professor and Dean of Algebra University College in Croatia. Also, warm welcome to you. He is an active researcher in the area of national qualification frameworks, validation of non-formal and informal learning, and knowledge management. Moreover, he participated in several national projects and implementation of various policy and regulatory documents in higher education, vocational and educational training, and adult education. Mislav currently acts as the president of Sector Skills Council for Electrotechnics and Computing, member of the National Council for Vocational Educational Training, and he's president of the Croatian Employers Association in Education. Now I'd like to hand over to our presenters, and we are looking forward to your input. Thank you very much.
Alexander, thanks for introduction. Dear policymakers, dear higher educational leaders, teachers, students, administratives, dear participants, probably this topic, this chapter, which actually deals with inclusion and inclusive learning and teaching in digital world, wouldn't be so interesting if we didn't have COVID, but probably we would have still talked about it. And now with COVID pandemics, which actually made us all move more or less to digital sphere and digital world, we hope that some ideas that we are going to share with you through this presentation, through discussions, and also through the report will be actually useful for you on all levels. So in the next slide, you'll see the team who stands behind these ideas and work.
Right, so hello everybody, my name is Keiko too, and good evening from Japan. So as you see, there are many of us here covering many parts of Europe and Asia that generate this chapter 2.
And actually, when you look at the structure of the chapter of the report and of our today's presentation, actually we structured it in a way that we tried to think about 3+1 different levels. This +1 means that we managed to find this international or pan-national policy level, mostly in Europe and in European higher educational area, not so much in Asia, but then other 3 levels are actually shared by both parts, Asia and Europe, meaning national level, institutional or higher educational level, and student and teacher, or if you want, personal level. So basically you'll see that most of the document and recommendations will try to actually move through these 3 levels. We'll start actually with the background and status quo, in which we are going to introduce our findings at all the levels. Somehow overarching idea is that COVID-19 has really abruptly changed the scenario and phase of implementing of digitalization, both digital transformation of institutions and digital teaching and learning. And we were more or less prepared for this. And it's important to stress out that context, the level of achievement and at any level basically significantly differs between different countries in Europe and also in Asia. So probably to conclude this slide, one of the conclusions from OECD actually is that most probably the change that will remain after pandemic is finished is actually intensification of digital technologies being used in higher education and digital transformation of all the processes.
Right, now we will begin by introducing the status quo on the topic. So in this slide, I will start with talking about inclusion. Inclusion is seen as one of the policy outcomes when discussing integration of digital technology into teaching and learning in the higher education. In order to capture the status quo, there are a few pillars, so to speak, which both national governments and higher educational institutions may need to consider in discussing and introducing digital teaching and learning. First dimension is the diversity of education or knowledge providers. In other words, who are the key players? As will be discussed later in this chapter, education providers in today's digital world vary greatly. In East Asian countries, for example, the national and local governments have played a significant part in the developing courses. While in some other geographical locations, the private sector has played an integral part in delivering the digital education. With the new key players, other than just the traditional higher educational institution acting today as content providers and offering online courses for upgrading skills rather than for diplomas or degree certificates. Second dimension of digital technology as a conduit to increase inclusiveness in teaching and learning is a focus on diversity of the knowledge recipients. Key to integrating digital technology into traditional teaching and learning is to ensure accessibility, sustainable growth, and inclusive society, including gender, age, cultural background, geographical location, personal or life experiences. And those are very vital to the digital teaching and learning design. Third dimension is the consideration of platforms, infrastructure, and appropriate devices to offer digital teaching and learning. The choice of technology should ensure the inclusion of learners from different backgrounds, locations, and experiences, including their level of IT skills. So higher educational institutions in both continents are key implementers, deciding how to design and redesign the teaching and learning environment to suit all learners.
And when we look from the supranational policy level, actually in Europe, there are two. One is the European Union level, or if you want, inter-European level. And there are a number of documents being produced in the past, let's say, year and a half or even 2 years. One of the key ones are actually those that were produced by Commission, Achieving European Education Area by 2025. With green and digital transition being recognized as the focus of the interventions. Also, Commission did the Digital Education Action Plan in 2020, and even European Parliament's resolution on the future of European education in the context of COVID, basically all support national countries to implement specific policy level interventions, where pedagogical use of digital technology to support and enhance teaching is really enforced, as is learning and assessment, or how actually students achieve those intended learning outcomes, or do they really achieve them if we measure them in digital testing and assessment. Development of digital resources and tools at institutional and other levels are also very important and very stressed out, as is enhancing innovative pedagogies. Digital skills of teachers and even learners being a barriers of bigger inclusion and quality of teaching is very important, and is also focused, as is assuring equal access to digitally supported high quality and inclusive opportunities within the institutions. And of course, the question of devices that students and staff would need. So COVID actually really intensified what Europe is doing. And actually, at the next slide, you're going to see that there is another level, which is actually more focused on European higher educational area, where 49 countries are sharing different, but still same ideas on how to implement this big space of education. And here concretely from the Rome ministerial communique, which was issued in 2020, there are a few notable areas that ministers of education recognized as recommendations to national countries, that they should reinforce social inclusion and enhance quality education using fully those new opportunities provided by digitalization, that they should support higher education institutions in using digital technologies for learning, teaching, and assessment, as well as for communicating and doing all the other research and other focuses that higher educational institutions share, that they should tailor education provision to needs of different types of learners and to build culture of equity and inclusion. And finally, to explore opportunities offered by the digital technologies which were not used so far maybe in what they were doing.
Now let me share the national level context in Asia. So Asia portrays diverse policy transitions from traditional to digital teaching and learning across the region. To respond to COVID impact, national governments seems to have played a key role, together with the different other players, in gravitating countries towards the integration of the digital technology in higher education. So let me give example. For example, China launched a platform, open platforms for teaching and learning with Chinese MOOCs. with the aiming to achieve what their slogan is, disrupted classrooms, uninterrupted learning. And private sector and non-profit organizations involved actively as well in parts of Asia in using digital technology to harness for learning and classroom teachings. For take example of Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong have shown some illustrations. Many digital platforms are known as leapfrog pathways, as they highlight how innovation and digital technology can help education develop from traditional one-way teaching and learning to a novel approach. The COVID-19 outbreak has been a key factor accelerating the growth towards digital teaching and learning. Japan, where I'm from, had a slow start in the beginning, but now it is bringing many supporting systems such as open platforms. Southeast Asia is expediting the national policies to initiate and revive the country's digital learning and teaching platforms. For example, Indonesia has a cross-ministerial collaboration, MOA and MRR, to address multifaceted diversity for more inclusive education. In Malaysia, the Ministry of Education announced a platform in 2020, the Digital Education Learning Initiative Malaysia Delima, offering application and services required for educators and students to collaborate online.
So if we look at the European national level, actually, we tried to focus on research that covered different things that national countries did. There was a relatively representative and very quality effect project made by European University Association, in which actually some of the results revealed that digital dimension of teaching and learning is embedded in wider national educational policies, but very few countries actually had some digital framework or very strong digital policy, although digitalization was very well addressed as contributing component to quality and inclusion of higher education. On the other hand, in Council's recommendation on digital education in European knowledge societies, actually European Union revealed that there are significantly different starting positions or levels of achievement in different EU member states in terms of availability of teaching tools, level of digital skills and digital pedagogical competencies, and actually they concluded that digital gaps across Union actually intensified as a result of COVID-19 pandemics. And in terms of countries or member states, they listed the biggest challenges for their institutions and higher education, being those four listed: enhancing digital pedagogies, practical training, and work-based learning, and how to actually cover this with online when this is really something that happens in companies and in real work of students, maybe not so much in online, assessment methods and their reliability, and alternatives to European and international learning mobility, which actually almost stopped at the beginning of the pandemics. And to conclude, the effect of pandemic is actually further acceleration of already ongoing processes of digital transformation of higher education and educational systems in Europe.
So for institution level in Asia, education institutions focused on investment on IT infrastructure. For example, campus IT networks and coverage, or training of staff on online or virtual teaching and learning, situational based provisions such as free SIM cards and financial supports, etc. In Chinese speaking countries, investment in IT infrastructure seems to be fairly in place long before the COVID. So furthermore, the government's education institutions are addressing digital divide now, and this should be emphasized further. In South Asia, and for example, Thailand, they have set up institutional policies to set course for hybrid digital learning and teaching in a future beyond COVID pandemic phase. You may know that AU and TPO, ASEM University Networks for Technology Enhanced Personal Learning, which was established based on the initial response of the the 51 members of the ASEAN institutions and the 3 university networks in 2018. So this produced the shared learning resource for the community, and it is very useful platform to respond to the pandemic context as well.
And in Europe, we could use actually a survey on digitally enhanced learning and teaching also by European Union of European University Association, which covered 368 institutions in 48 countries. And basically this research was done with a similar approach in 2014. So actually there was option to see what happened in these 7 years. Actually, research results shown that institutions managed to somehow pivot to the digital and online learning as a result of pandemics. 90% of them, for instance, said that they already had some digital libraries and content, but still 2/3 said that it wasn't enough. So resources were not actually up to the purpose because no one expected what happened. 88% of institutions already had strategy for digitally enhanced teaching and learning, but actually underdeveloped pedagogical approaches and resources were something that they concluded as a result. 25% of institutions offered some kind of virtual mobility for its students to tackle the problem of pandemic and how to travel when actually some borders were almost closed. Digital skills were often not present with the students, especially in some disciplines, because those contents were only often voluntary contents for students to take, but not part of those formal curriculums. And what is also important that over 60% of institutions include staff, students, and they have budgets for digital transformation. And now they kind of intensified their investment. And maybe to conclude, 50% of institutions, according to the research, actually found those areas listed on the right that they need to further focus on and develop. And it's data protection, cybersecurity, prevention of plagiarism when students are allowed to provide their work online and do it alone or in any setup where there is no control, ethics, intellectual property, and examinations and testing. And one thing that you might find interesting is that prior to pandemic, only 1/3 of institutions of those universities had some kind of short programs online, and only half of them had at least some short micro-credentials. And this increased as a result of pandemics, but not significant.
Right, and then at the individual level in Asia, there are 4 major determinants on the digital teaching and learning. Common with Europe, perhaps, will be the following. So attitudes towards digital teaching and learning, technical capacity of digital mode of delivery, knowledge of use by instructors and students, and effectiveness of digital teaching and learning methods. So there are varieties of developments that in those determinants within the region, Asia. Japan is an example, showing resilience against adapting digital technology at first, as I mentioned earlier, while Singapore addresses digital natives in their action already. And students in Thailand showing disappointments for lacking the full on-campus experience due to the digital pivot. And digital divide, not to be forgotten, is still the major problem in the countries in Southeast Asia, considering both geographical and economic aspects of a full access to digital technology and gadgets. Coupled with the limitation of foundational knowledge on online learning pedagogy, many faculty are not fully prepared to leverage advanced technology to support learning. Based on that, what we can say here at this point is education is one of such public policies where policymakers both at a national and institutional level needs to readjust their mindset and then provide the opportunities for students to participate more, especially with the availability of digital technology. At this point, the role of institutional leadership will also play a major part in preparing educators and students to transit into the new normal of a digital teaching and learning in post-pandemic times.
And when we look at an individual level in Europe, there is a European Student Union research done in 2020 and published in 2021, basically revealed that students felt during pandemics the lack of stability, that they reported mental health problems and different fears from those of losing work of their parents and their kind of part-time works, to those about what future brings. Will pandemic ever end? Are they losing part of their lives where they need to kind of meet and socialize, but they stay at home and look at the screens and so on? And there was a clear preference for face-to-face teacher-student interaction and even student-student interaction compared to what they had to do. On the other hand, Bologna follow-up group actually in their report gave two recommendations that are kind of useful at the individual level. The first one is to improve the quality of teacher skills development, practical elements of curricula and assessment methods. And the other one is that students should be provided with appropriate devices and they need to have a good quality educational content in order to be successful in digital teaching and learning.
Now, we have prepared 4 spotlight areas in this chapter, addressing both system level and institutional level recommendations to enhance inclusive learning and teaching in the digital world. And let me start with the first spotlight area, which is diversifying the learning process by digital tools. So it's now clear that the new generation of communication technologies, such as Zoom as we're using it now, or Teams, etc., are facilitating a massive increase in collaborative research and teaching, both within and between countries, and bringing new opportunities for institutions, educators, and students. And higher education is increasingly collaborating with the external private sector partners as well. Now, this brings both opportunities and risks. Opportunities may be that an increasing range of new technologies, such as those driven by artificial intelligence, are providing opportunities for adaptive learning, enabling each student individually to follow their own pathways through the learning materials to the prescribed learning outcome, which is great. Risks may be that higher education becoming more dependent on and losing expertise to the private sector. These might lead to the dependency on a monopoly system and also lead to the compromising quality and reputation. Lack of focus can mean a lack of strategic direction in institution, leading to the wrong subjects being offered, studied, and valued, so compromising the country's skills development. It might lead to a thinning out of a country's stability of higher educational institutions. So for the recommendation based on this for policymakers would be that to use available technology in post-COVID-19 momentum to reconceptualize part of a higher education's very purpose, while investing in higher educational institutions' digital capacities to develop digital content and teaching in order to avoid their overdependence to a private sector providers. As for the recommendation for university level, it's important to put institutions' core purpose into the focus. Institutional goals should always come first. As we say, pedagogy comes before technology. Explore what practices and what purposes technology uniquely makes possible. For example, instead of automating examinations, use technology to revise new methods of assessment and accreditation.
In spotlight area number 2, we focus on social dimension of digital learning, and the recommendation for policymaker is actually that they need to provide space and technical support to ensure that potential of communication technologies for inter and international collaborations can be leveraged without excluding any stakeholders, including teachers and students, and without causing any mental and other health issues. But what we actually mean is that new technologies actually rapidly provide new opportunities for human interactions, for let's say different groups like people with disability, where AI could now read images and some softwares could help in transition from speech to sign language and so on. But basically, although there is strong support for implementation of technology, social dimension should be always kind of also kept in mind in order to fight those side effects of technology, like social networks, which shown that they could create echo chambers in which some posts and some comments are actually such that they exaggerate individuals' existing biases and so on. So basically, at this policy level, the technology should be used with a very strong focus on social dimensions. On other slides, another slide, when we talk about recommendations for university, basically this better than nothing option, which we all used when actually we were hit by pandemics, is something that should be now strongly questioned in a way that more digital technology could be used, but when it brings value. And this means that face-to-face teaching and learning and engagement have been repeatedly shown as better for learning and for students. And actually, this means that it should be combined. And in addition, student life in higher education should be not reduced only to just teaching and learning and narrow range of academic activities, because students actually need sports, arts, they need social events, they need student representations, all those elements that actually make their life as students full.
Now, the third area for Spotlight is the multidimensional collaboration through digital education. Digital inequality is a very real challenge, but not impossible to resolve. Investing in digital literacy through education will benefit not only older generation or those with disabilities, but also students and youth, those disadvantaged by their lower income level, or those who are located in rural regions with less established infrastructure. There's a risk that accessibility to such digital environments will result in a wider divide among those with access and those without. Limitations of the technology by universities may hinder many further opportunities. So the recommendations for policymakers at this point would be, with the pandemic impact by COVID-19, we urgently need to lay the foundation of an inclusive digital society. The most critical and urgent first step is to realize such an equitable and inclusive vision of a digitally enhanced education is to improve online infrastructure at a national and a regional scale, providing that basic lifeline for education. Individuals should also be given an opportunity to cultivate sufficient digital literacy skills through publicly provided training. Actions by policymakers are desperately in need to realize this. It's also worth noting that digital technologies are transforming the worlds of business, work, service delivery at a very rapid speed. So those who are left behind will be even more detached from changes resulting in neglect of the basic human rights in a digital age. Choosing the right technology is very important. One-size approach due to the service design and package may lead to serve only the privileged students. So our recommendation for the universities will be here to create an institutional guidelines on how to select the right digital instruments, which should be produced in a multidimensional collaboration among different institutions, sectors, stakeholders, and structure the conversation among them and building the communication around them about the use of digital technology is also important. It can help reframing the institutional strategy and the wide selection of instruments, reflecting on the regional specific agenda.
And the last spotlight area focuses on quality of digital opportunities. And actually, what is more and more visible could be maybe best concluded from the report from World Economic Forum from 2020, where companies estimate that by 2024, around 40% of all employed workers will require reskilling of up to 6 months because of the change in culture, how we work, and of technology. And 94% of business leaders actually report that they expect employers to pick up new skills on the job, which was never so high. So this means actually that there is a big cohort of new users of knowledge, which will be, let's say, on the market. The question is whether traditional universities are interested in serving their purposes and how policymakers would like to help in reskilling of the workforce. So this opens a new opportunity for actually institutions, meaning that policymakers should foster upskilling initiatives among governments, higher educational institutions and entrepreneurs by generating opportunities for exchanging information regarding skill needs. And also they should allocate funding for universities to develop such competency-based training and incentivize them to use them. And then if we look at the level of institutions, actually what we could have read in the newspapers is that during pandemics, more and more students in countries where higher education is traditionally being paid by students were reporting poor value for money. They actually said we are paying too much and not getting what we did. On the other hand, there is a strong increase in income and in profits, if you want, of those educational technology companies around the world. So basically, what becomes more and more clear is that students are more and more kind of in a jig learning, trying to find those short options with shorter spans of attention to get skills, and then use these skills either through RPL or without it to actually boost their careers. So institutions should actually understand that they compete sometimes with high income, high performance companies, that content that they produce should be of high quality, that they need actually to also think about how to make students interested in maybe shorter chunks of knowledge, also more interested in learning per se, by creating communities of learners and teachers and by making their attention spans longer and bigger. And with this, pretty much we conclude our spotlights and we conclude our recommendations. More could be, of course, read in the report. And we would very much appreciate your questions and comments on those both findings and recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Keiko. Thank you very much, Mislav, for this inspiring and engaging presentation. I have a whole bunch of questions for myself and also gathered in the chat. So we're looking forward to a nice discussion here. What I have learned from your presentation is that technology is already there, and it's about making sure that everybody is able to use the technologies and has access to digital learning opportunities that should be designed in a proper pedagogical way. So as we have learned during the opening session, there was a strong argument for a humanized or human-centered approach. I would say, therefore, we could start with our first question: how to make virtual education more feasible to the students living in remote villages. So who wants to take the question?
Well, so I would start, I guess. So applying technology doesn't mean that you are applying top-notch everything all at once. Just applying, say, for example, a text messaging as a part of a learning process to actually increase the communication. That's also already a digital technology enhanced teaching and learning. So do not have to, go with that, split of a mountain. You can go step by step and adjust to the local agenda and what's available. I would just say that.
And maybe I think that captures the idea very much. But the thing also is that actually, if you need to cover many students without significant cost, then it's either some part of contribution of creating content which could be done or organized, or governments helping in production. because if there is a need to purchase something, then there is another bunch of questions of language, who produced what are the IP rights and so on. So basically, there are ways in collaborating together to create content which could be free or very cheap to cover also those underprivileged students if your budgets are not big.
Thank you very much. The next one, I think, is really close to our first question. Please kindly suggest strategies to be done in diversifying teaching and learning amidst the technical divides in this pandemic. So do you have some?
Okay, one strategy I'm quite familiar, and Alexander, you are quite familiar, would be to engage in virtual exchange or collaborative online international learning as a methodology. And some other chapters in the Outlook report actually will focus on a little bit talking about it. But it really is a way of bringing all the available encounters of others using internet accessible web tools, and have them engage in a project-based learning or research together, collaborative learning, basically. So that might be a way, and you don't really necessarily have to do it for the entire semester or something like that. You can actually plan it for a few weeks or so, just expand it in a way that you can, in a plausible way. And then you are actually providing more opportunities that did not exist before if we're just doing a brick and mortar face-to-face classroom setting. Maybe Alexander, you might want to add to it too.
Yes, sure. I'm fully convinced of the methodology and the model. That's also something that we are promoting at the DAAD. We have right now 140 projects that are conducting virtual exchange scenarios around the globe with partners from around the globe. I think almost each continent is involved in so many countries. So I really, I fully agree with that. But Mislav, do you have also some strategies like the COIL model and methodology, or would you emphasize something different?
We also recognized actually that moving to online actually is very often just one click away from learning, and that motivation is the key. So motivation in many ways depends on what kind of interaction you have with others, either through virtual projects, as you mentioned, or with approaches in which actually there are different elements of learning in a way that there is a part which you maybe need to do alone, but then a strong focus on commenting and contributing from the others, either with very simple technology like forums or something like this. Even email could work sometimes. So actually it doesn't need to be very advanced if you think about what challenges and problems you want to solve with your approach. And maybe this pandemic for us is incentive to think about our approaches, which maybe were not perfect even before the pandemic, but we were used to them. This is maybe time to try to change what we did for better, and this could be a trigger, at least to think. And then sometimes you could conclude, well, what I did was perfect and there is nothing to do or to change. But sometimes when you think hard enough, you make it better.
Two other aspects coming from the audience. One is that training is missing for teachers. And the other one is, what do you think is the future of digital teaching and learning? Because we are all having this kind of digital fatigue. We want to meet in person, and we have to talk about online sessions, hybrid sessions, things fully online or partially. I'm very interested in your thoughts on that. Keiko, maybe you want to start?
Right, for the training part, like we're in a chapter 2 actually addressing this very strongly, that this is have to be publicly available digital literacy training that needs to be provided for everyone, not just the students in higher educational institution, but in the society. So digitally enhanced society might actually have to come before maybe a digital education, because that's where the society is where the students are going to be dispatched after they're graduating. So digitally enhanced society will actually encourage the students, learners to become more digitally enhanced as well. So the training should not be forgotten over past, rather than thinking about which tools to implement in addition to what they have. They should all thinking about how to actually provide more wider range of digital literacy training. That's something that I would make a comment to. Mislav, if you have something to add?
Maybe it somehow seems that education of higher educational teachers, if you look at higher education for a second, actually very often misses, at least it's in a number of countries I know, misses this pedagogical component. In order to become a professor, you need to actually provide knowledge in a very narrow or more or less narrow area. In my case, it's computer science. In some other case, it's some other science, but it's not that anyone specifically had me for a year on the university to teach me how to teach. Meaning that basically many of the teachers are self-taught, and then institutions try to add chunks of knowledge and approaches in order to enhance what they did prior to pandemics. And then pandemics actually did this change, abrupt change of culture. Some things that we thought would be impossible now are very possible. When we talked with teachers, they said, okay, let's wait for a month. I don't want to teach online. This pandemic will probably stop in a month, and then we are going to get students back. And then it wasn't a month, it was 2-3 months, and then a year. And then they actually, along the way, changed their ways of thinking and tried to learn how to be better in a different way of teaching. When pandemic finishes, I think that this pendulum will kind of swing back towards let's kind of be more together, let's have what we missed. But at the end of the day, some of the culture will remain changed. So we need to think about what will we end up. Probably it won't be 80% online and 20% residential, but also it probably won't be what we had in the past. I think that we are going to take best of both worlds. We are going to take those good elements of digital, although we maybe didn't embrace it at the beginning because it was given to us as better than nothing option. But now living with this for a year or so will make us think on how this could make our teaching better, even when we don't have to do it like this.
Yes, another question coming from Bangladesh. How is digital world hampering inclusive education? So because it seems that we are all digital enthusiasts, but what are the downsides of digitalization when it comes to inclusion?
Downsides. When you are actually looking at how students are being in process of getting it, and they're so getting used to this online pivot of teaching and learning modes, so that they're now have to pick up again human skills in a way. So communication skills, maybe in-person communication skills and communication skills on a digital virtual space, both have to be trained now. So the soft skills, when we talk about it, now we have to pay attention to, okay, which mode are you talking about? So that's a downside, and also something that, really give us a cautious alert, I guess, that we need to actually address from here on.
Also, I think, if I may add a bit, that it might, more use of technology, it might deepen inequalities because those who are underprivileged don't have access to technology, or even lack some basic level of IT skills, maybe are not completely excluded in 0 and 1 sense, but are kind of excluded because maybe they don't get most of what technology could bring or is bringing to others which don't have this kind of problem. So we really need to think about not using technology as actually a way to unconsciously and of course not with a purpose deepen inequalities that there is between learners.
Thank you. There's another question with regard to the didactics and pedagogies and aiming at the courses that need physical appearance. What do you think? How can they also be transformed in a digital way? How could it be part of the curriculum? Do you have any advices from this side?
Right. So we're right in the middle of the pandemic. So we're not allowed to, meet in person. So we've been given the context. We tend to think everything has to be online. Everything has to be virtual. But hopefully, right, with this advancement of medical situation, we will have opportunity of physical contacts be a part of availability in the pedagogy. So here's the many alternatives is going to be available in a little sometime later. You have the virtual alternatives and you have the physical contact alternatives. But then you can think about, okay, do we want to do this in person or do we just keep it online? Or blending it both might be the most enriched way of providing the pedagogy. And that might be the most effective pedagogy to adopt. So many things to think about, but I would not go with that, we have to do everything virtually.
I completely agree because it's at the current level of technology development impossible. In some disciplines, it's really